Right. So let me get my screen set up here. So welcome everyone. I'm Michael Naylor, and I'm coming to you through virtual reality from South Portland, Maine. And I've got the pleasure of getting to talk with Paul today, a beloved Type Five, and get to hear about his journey and what he's learned and lessons along the way. So, a little bit of the agony and the ecstasy and in between. So, Paul, thanks for being here. And looks like you got a nice sunny day. We have the same here in Maine. So, wanted to just start with how you learned about the Enneagram, how it unfolded,
Okay.
and I'll ask
Well,
questions along.
I'm a retired Presbyterian minister, but before I retired, I was in a clergy group, and that meets once a year someplace. And somebody brought along the Wisdom book, and we played with it for a few days, and not really taking tests or anything. But once we had a little bit of scotch, and we were reading through the levels and entertaining ourselves by looking at what the bottom levels were. And when
Mhm.
I got to the bottom level of a 5, I suddenly realized that I had never been there, but I had looked over the edge to that place. And that's may not be the best way to find out you're a 5, but that was, I think it was something like imploded
Mhm.
something, but it was
Yeah,
it was pretty bad.
yeah.
And then that got me into realizing that this system was telling me more about myself than I was admitting. And
Mhm.
got more and more into it and realized that the 5 was definitely my categorization,
Yeah.
and been using it ever since then. And we took all of the trainings from Russ, um,
Mm.
and my wife and I did it together. So we know
Mm.
the barn, got to know the barn really well, and met a lot of really great people like you. You were at one of the trainings that we were at
Mhm.
least one.
Mhm.
And I have since done more reading, and have actually done some workshops, taught some things. We use it in our counseling, especially for premarital work, um, and
Mm.
find it to be a really, really helpful tool. Um, and lately, the things that I've been working on is the Enneagram and spirituality.
Mm.
In particular, I've been asked to do a seminar next month, which I don't think I'm ready for, but I'm a 5. I never feel like I'm ready for anything. Um, on the Enneagram and marginalized communities.
Mm.
And this is with a Hispanic church in Trenton, New Jersey. So I'm looking forward to that with trepidation, because I'm an old white guy and I'm not sure I have any cred to talk to these people about this, but they asked me, so I
Oh,
will do the best I can.
awesome. Awesome. That sounds very exciting. Well, so sometimes people will express myself too that when I learned about my type, I was quite shocked at what I was missing. When I read Don Risso's description, I felt like he looked into my soul and described my inner workings, and I was horrified actually in the beginning. Uh, what has been your experience in terms of seeing?
Well, I've one of the things that I say to folks when they're trying to figure out their type, if you're not horrified by it, it's probably a problem not typing yourself right. If
Yeah.
it's something you want to be, um, I mean, I've learned that it's, just as an example, if I'm doing tests with young men, they often see themselves as 8s, no matter what they are.
Oh, interesting.
And in some ways, women often type themselves as 2s because they're socialized to think that way.
Yeah.
But no, if it's something you really want to be, I would question it.
Yes, yes. Well, there's often a story that that the Type Four is the most envied of the types, and all the Type Fours go, oh, "You've got to be kidding me! It's
Yeah.
it's not that much fun. It's hard." So for you, say a little bit about what you identify with as sort of your type fiveness, your personality patterns.
Well, I also have a four wing, and that becomes part of it. Um, but I think, as I was thinking of what we were going to talk about today, fives are basically hoarders. That doesn't mean I have a house full of pizza boxes and old New York Times, but it does mean that we glom onto and hold on to everything, whether it's information or feelings or data. Um, it's very hard. One of the things that I have to work on all the time is expression, whether it's an expression through writing or just conversation, or because I'm very, very, very close to the vest about everything. I mentioned to you when you asked me to do this, I had some reticence because I'm still dealing with disclosure issues and
Yeah.
don't always like to share everything. So on top of that, the Enneagram isn't everything about people. There are other aspects to us. And long before I knew the Enneagram, I tested out on Myers-Briggs as a off the scale introvert. And I remember having a conversation with Russ about this because I sensed I was a five, but he was wondering, and he said, you don't seem to have that intensity. And I said, well, I'm really a strong introvert, and the intensity is all focused inward.
Yeah.
The intensity doesn't come out very much.
Yeah.
And I think he understood that. And so it's all about getting, keeping, collecting. I mean, I have literal collections as well. And we really resonate when Russ does his thing in training one about the types. The idea of having a house full of bookshelves and CD racks, but no bed is exactly, I mean, that's literally where I was for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a lot of fives will share something like that, and that sort of passion for ideas and having my collection of ideas at hand, and if not stored in my head center, and it's like food for my soul. I remember one type five on a panel. I said, what's a great Christmas gift for you? He said, books. Books. That's it. Just give me books.
Books or shelving.
Shelving. Right. And I had one other guy from Taiwan say I had to build an addition to my house for my books because it was just spilling into everything. So thank God for.
Well, and the thing is, the other thing about fives is we never have enough.
Yeah.
I joke that if I wasn't a minister and didn't have to produce a sermon every week, I would still be working on the first one.
Yeah.
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 And the other thing is, I mean, there's a lot of other things, but we don't like our stuff messed with. Especially, I mean, I know it frustrates my wife. There's an awful lot going on in my head. I mean, she can probably tell by what books are laying around, but I just don't have much conversation with. That's not so much a trust issue as I've got my system and I don't want anybody messing with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
These are not all positive things, by the way. These are stuff that fives have to deal with. And it's all it's almost all very interior, very mental, very head centered, as it were.
Yeah.
So the things that I've had to learn, and we've been doing this 15 years, we've been studying the Enneagram, I guess. One is I got to get out of my head so that I focus on. For a while I was doing yoga. I'm now doing voice lessons so that I have to literally make noise.
Awesome.
I play the trumpet, but not much and not well. But that's another thing. Just the idea of making literally a noise that puts me out into the world is helpful. But also long walks and I mean, riding my bike, things like that. Getting tactile, physical activity is part of the spiritual journey.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, I mean, we literally moved 2 weeks ago, so I'm in this house we just bought, but having to um, unload some of that stuff is also
Yeah.
a discipline, and it's traumatic. I've been selling some books on Amazon for years, but just the periodic culling of the books is, I got to go take a day off after I do that because it's just some, I just feel like I'm shedding part of my brain.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it, but you know, there's a sense of wanting to get to some sense of simplicity and focus, and um, I don't know. I've always been aspirationally kind of minimalist, but in my real life, I'm not. So,
Yeah. Yeah. So when let's say when you were a little guy, grade school or high school, how did you navigate life with this
well, when I was in those years, I was I was born the introvert thing, but also I was nearsighted and I was not diagnosed until sixth grade. So I basically was an inveterate reader from age 2 till now because I couldn't see beyond 18 inches from my nose, and
yeah.
that's what my world was.
Hmm.
So, I mean, my parents would joke because when I was 9 years old, I was an expert on the Civil War. It was during the bicentennial, the centennial of the Civil War. So we would go visit Gettysburg and things like that.
Yeah.
Um, but I literally had a Civil War museum in my room.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so that kind of passion for knowledge and ideas seems as certainly the strong suit. And then I guess the question is, how do I balance it with the rest of life so that I keep the gift, but I don't get eaten by
yeah,
the gift?
yeah. I mean, I joke that um, 12 years of public school was almost wasted on me. It would have been better for them to give me a library card when I was in first grade and leave me alone.
Yeah. Yeah. So it must have been quite a challenge to, work with the introversion. Did people try to get you to come out and be more extroverted? And
Yeah, I mean, when I was about 10 or so, 11, um, my parents, who were both extroverts, literally thought there was something wrong with me. I mean, in those days, we don't use the term anymore, but they thought I was retarded
yeah.
and were sending me to counselors and all kinds of stuff like that. But all I was a five that just, my world was small, and I was collecting and just, it's like, I'm reading, leave me alone. What's the problem? No, you got to go out and be with people. You got to go to parties. You got to do this. No, I don't. Leave me alone.
I'm quite happy with my books here. Yeah.
Exactly. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so when you so this whole process of working with expressing yourself, um, how's that going?
well, there was a point in my life when I had to make a decision whether to go to grad school or go into the ministry.
Hmm.
And if I had gone into grad school, I probably would have, spent my life writing books about Greek verbs or something. Um, but
Yeah.
I knew something inside me, even before I knew anything about personality type, I knew that that was a kind of implosion, and that I had to force myself to be in a place where I was with people and had to express.
Yeah.
And it wasn't pretty, but especially at the beginning. But I did become a minister where I had to deal with people. I had to deal with people in very personal situations. They had to deal with me,
Mm.
and I had to produce sermons and lesson plans and liturgies and other
Mm.
things that were expressive. So
Yeah.
um, that's part of the way I dealt with it before I even knew that I was a five.
Yeah.
That made sense, and I sort of credited myself with some kind of unknown wisdom because that
Yeah.
isn't where my fiveness wanted me to go.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It sounds like you had a intuitive hunch, something guiding you.
yeah,
That,
I still don't. I remember making that decision. And it was like, really, you got to get out?
What was I thinking?
It would be really hard, and it was.
Mm,
Um, it was, yeah. You just have to force yourself. Now, when we were taking one of the later trainings, there's an exercise where they put all the types, all the people of one type together,
mhm.
and they're given a task. And I'm sitting there with all these other fives, and it was really educational because everybody was like down rabbit holes, and nobody could focus on the task. I had enough experience trying to counteract that I ended up leading the group and producing something, a little play about, I don't even remember.
Yeah.
Um, but if I had followed my instinct isn't the word, but if I had gone the path of least resistance as a five,
Mm.
as I said, I would be in academia doing something that nobody would ever care about, but I do it really well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so that was the part three where we everybody gets divided up into their type, which is always illuminating in many ways.
That was really amazing
Yeah. Yeah.
because I there was about four or five others of us, and I remember who are these people, and then realized that that's me, and
Yeah.
that's often the way I come off in regular groups.
Yeah.
Um,
Mhm.
but I learned over the years to use that and
Mm.
hopefully to like when I was doing Bible studies, um, I guess I could be I'm a font of useless trivia, and that's people who are interested in useless trivia about the Bible or about the first century or whatever, that they found that fascinating. But sometimes it's just an avoidance of the issue.
Mhm.
The
Yeah.
other thing I call myself is an insufferable know-it-all, but um, there was one time I played Trivial Pursuit in a group, and I this isn't bragging. This is just nobody else got to go. But pick a card, answer the question, move the piece. Pick a card, answer the question, move the piece. So
Oh,
that's that can be bad because when I had a son, as you know,
yeah.
and when he was in school, he would ask me to help him with his homework, but he knew that I would not help him with his homework. I would just do it because he'd say something like, "Dad, what's the capital of Mongolia?" And I go, "Ulaanbaatar."
Oh, how funny.
And his mom would go, "What are you? You're supposed to help him, not do it, not answer the question."
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, well, it seems like fives just collect a lot of information, and as one of my five friends says, I've got libraries in my head, and if I sometimes I'll say he's a physicist, and I'll say, "Tell me about black holes," and it's like a vault opens, and we take the journey,
Yes,
and he just
exactly.
goes. So that's well,
My wife, yeah, my wife knows not to ask me things because it's like she'll ask me about, I don't know, anything, and I'll start with, well, in the fifth century, or this is what it was in the Latin, but of course, the whatever.
yeah.
Um, and she's going, no, I'm just asking you for the time. You don't have to give me. Ah,
Yeah. Well, one of my friends that I sponsored in recovery said, he says to my wife, I say, "Do you want the story or do you want the short encapsulated details?" It says, "Give me
right.
the short piece." It says, "Because I've got a whole universe to share with you." So I wonder, like, it's when I like whenever I'm working with him, if I say something that he hasn't heard before, he'll immediately write it down in his phone, and he has a logging system where he can go back and retrieve all the cool ideas that he learned. But there's like new ideas are like a life force. Like I can't, I got to remember this, and So
Right.
so
Exactly.
there's, so passion. It seems like the passion for ideas. It's almost like their ideas are a living entity. Almost like I can't just let it go.
No, and I'm an inveterate journaler and always have been. And it's about and making connections and
Hmm.
uh, forming um, structures in mostly in my head. But
Hmm.
I have a blog, so I try to get some of that stuff out.
Oh,
Um, um, yeah.
and are you going to do a memoir on how to live in the psychic structure of a five, or
Um,
you probably have a lot of awesome and funny stories that
yeah,
could.
there would be. I mean, when Susan and I teach together, it's we get a lot of laughs because she's a one.
Oh,
So a five and a one is we tease each other about our excesses.
yeah.
Um, what I was going to say before I go into that is that I just as I was getting ready for this, I realized that I keep two journals.
Hmm.
I keep a journal of sort of ideas and head things,
Hmm.
and then I have another journal for emotional, I mean heart and gut things.
Hmm.
That journal never leaves the house. The other
Hmm.
one I'll take everywhere and but it made me realize that um, I have bifurcated myself and put head things into a special place. The other things are too personal and too secret. They have to stay separate and even more um, even more covered and closed up than
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Yes, I do. Well,
That part of me to be um, that's to be ready for prime time. That's just me trying to get stuff worked out, but I
mhm.
don't want anybody to actually see that.
Well, one of my five friends said my concern. He said I can't do an interview because I'm afraid I'll give out too much information and that's going to make me
Oh,
vulnerable
right.
to the crazy ass world. So I it says that's my biggest thing is if I'm too vulnerable to the wrong people, I could be hurt by it. And
Yeah.
so it's a sensitivity that he has around, and I wonder if it goes back to we often talk about type fives as being a rejection type,
Right.
and the idea that little type fives can have that sort of sense that they got the wrong planet and that it's
Exactly.
an alien place that isn't particularly safe or smart. And, in
Uh,
that sense, I could be sort of destroyed by the ignorance of the planet at any moment if I'm not careful.
yeah, yes. Susan knows that if I start muttering darkly about the humans,
Yeah.
we hit a bad place.
Yeah.
But that's exactly when I was an adolescent. I was sure I was from some other planet that I was misplaced at birth.
Yeah.
Um, but also the rejection thing played into some facts about my when I was born in 1955. I weighed 2 pounds,
Wow.
and I was in an incubator for 6 weeks. And
Amazing.
I was in those days that was unusual to survive. Um,
Hmm.
um, but it meant that I had minimal, if any, human contact for 6 weeks. And then later, much later in my life, my mom confessed to me that when I finally came home, they were afraid to touch me
Huh.
because, because I was so small and delicate. And plus, she
Hmm.
had PPD,
Hmm.
which I didn't know until I was like 50. But
Hmm.
my point is that um, this played into what and I'm one of the party that believes that you're born your type
Me
or you're
too.
conceived your type
Yeah.
in any case. So that just played into the sense of rejection and displacement and
Hmm.
not getting what you need and the
Hmm.
futility of complaining and all of these other things that as a five just became I don't know how another type would have dealt with it, but as a five it became a huge ego superstructure that I'm still having trouble overcoming.
Hmm.
I'm
Hmm.
67. So
Hmm. Hmm. Well, it's certainly a powerful impression, and I mean, my experience is whatever the type is. I'm a type 4 with a 5 wing. That the structure is powerful, and even though I have gathered all sorts of information in my head center around how to navigate it, it can have a mind of its own and does what
yeah,
it does. And I go, oh, there it is again.
you
So,
notice it. That's the thing. You can notice it, but changing it is really hard. And
hmm,
um, I mean, I've been using meditation and these various physical activities kind of things to try to change that, but it's
mhm.
um, and it has to be done in a backhanded way. You can't like attack it. You can't. I believe me. I've tried to go out there and act like a five, like an eight, and it's not pretty.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So the challenge is how do I create awareness that allows the patterns not to be so unconscious and immortal for that matter. It's like how do I begin to relax into the pattern so that I actually have the gap of choice rather than go with whatever the pattern is have enough awareness and certainly one of the things that Don and Russ talk about and I think most teachers is that learning to observe yourself without judgment and accept what's there is what starts to break the hypnotism. Now,
Yeah,
what they don't say is it might take 5 lifetimes, but in the meantime, do a little bit at a time. So, what has been helpful for you?
it would have been helpful if my ancestors had worked on this too.
Yeah, yeah,
I just feel like I'm the first lifetime.
yes,
Anyway,
yeah,
um, I lost my train of thought there.
yeah. So for we're talking about these what seem to be immortal patterns. Um, what I notice sometimes is, I will have a gap of awareness where I go, oh, there's a pattern, and I've followed it 9,000 times. So I don't need to jump on that train again, and that's nice because I don't have to say I'm sorry and do all the unnecessary suffering. Um, and then there's moments where the patterns are operating and I'm just kind of asleep. And maybe I bump into somebody and they go, ouch. And I go, oh, sorry about that. So it's quite the journey.
It's like there's voices that um, there's voices that want you to go in one direction, and you either go with them or you watch them, but they're never quite silent. Sometimes I can visualize it as rooms I don't go into.
Hmm. Hmm.
But sometimes, depending on the stress level, you just find yourselves in those rooms and having to either identify with or just not identify with, but listen to those voices.
Hmm.
I think that one of the keys for me anyway has been cultivating gratitude,
Hmm.
because that means realizing what you have and being thankful for it and not seeing it as not enough,
Hmm.
not seeing it as not measuring up to what you want or should have or um, there's a line in one of the Star Wars movies about um, where someone says something to Han Solo about, you'll get more money than you can imagine. And he goes, well, I can imagine quite a lot. And if your life is in your head, life is
Hmm.
not going to measure up to my fantasies. It's not going to measure up to my my
Yeah.
perfect, image of the way things should be.
Yeah.
And there's that bit of oneness coming in.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
um,
Well, what occurs to me is that when I'm perhaps at my best and my head center is quiet and my heart is relaxed and I'm sensing my body, it's like whatever I'm experiencing is good. It's enough. There's nothing more to be done. And I feel very grateful for that. It's like, it's good to be here. And I'm not caught up in all the, you know, historic fantasies of whatever, but I'm just here. And I think, that, and then I'm just sort of hanging out like everybody else in it, and it feels good.
yeah, and I've looked for me, meditation has a lot to do with sensation.
Yeah.
You have to sort of feel where you are. When we would do those, I forget who the leader was. We would do those body scans
Yeah.
at one or two of the trainings. Was that a training or was that somewhere else? And that was when we were in Connecticut or something, when the barn was being worked on. We met elsewhere, but anyway,
Hmm.
um, um, but body scans with because if I meditate without something
Mm.
to focus on, it just becomes me thinking,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's counterproductive.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that's a really something that was really helpful for me to learn also, because within the structure of the Gurdjieff work, which is something I'm involved with, it's the idea that the deeper I can sense both external and internal in my body, um, that's kind of like um, a stake in the ground that allows me to stay present when my emotions are kicking me horizontal to the earth. It's like a viewing station, that I can anchor, and it allows me on a good day to objectively notice my thoughts and how there's a story coming through. Oh, that's the same movie I've watched 5,000 times. It's still interesting, but I don't need to watch it right now. But that sensation has been really important for me, because I used to just do head centered sort of things, which had value for sure. But when I started to include the body, it seemed to open up a deeper awareness of the present moment. So, yeah, anyway, sounds like that's been really helpful for you too. So,
Yes, I mean, who was it? It was Richard Rohr, I think, who was talking about when he was teaching the Enneagram at some Benedictine monastery, and he was very impressed with them until he realized that they were all fives, and it was just what there was no challenge. Uh, and that
yeah,
was, not sure why I went on this tangent, but um, that was my original plan after uh, failed marriages. Um, my original plan was to see my son into adulthood and then literally become a monk or a hermit or something, because I was not, even as an adult, I was not particularly feeling that I was meshing well with the world, shall we say.
yeah, yeah.
Um, but then I met Susan and that all changed. So um,
Mm, mm.
there is that. But that, once again, that's sort of like the intellectual temptation. It's just too, I would just implode and disappear. I'd be a black hole.
Yeah,
So part of me knows that I have to be connected or I will disappear.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it's quite a predicament. The sort of psychological enneagram pattern that we get to live through and with, and so for you, when you're at your best, when you're feeling your most present, like what do you notice?
Um, I notice a kind of integration between my centers so that top heavy, as it were.
Hmm.
You know, the way Russ jokes about how we fives literally walk with our heads forward.
The body being a taxi cab for the head.
Just it's a transportation mechanism more than anything else.
Yeah.
No. Um, but once I can integrate, and it can be very scary because the heart and the gut are foreign countries
Hmm.
sometimes. So, but learning to integrate them and take them into account
Hmm.
um, really helps. And part of that is the my forewing,
Yeah.
uh, which it's just the wing, so it doesn't really dominate anything, but it can be part of my um, style is the word, but my presentation. Um,
Hmm.
like I've always um, had just wanted to be slightly more flamboyant than, or my favorite color is orange, and so I will wear orange things, but it's totally, you know, it's totally weird in terms of my otherwise closed off nature. Uh,
Yeah.
uh, I was in a church meeting once, and we were interviewing a new minister, and she put on her paperwork that she had studied the Enneagram, and so I asked her in the interview, you say you studied the Enneagram. I'm guessing you're a four. And she goes, what gave it away? The hoop earrings? And I said, yeah. Nobody else knew what we were talking about.
Oh, yeah. One of my favorite people, you might have met her. Grace is a type 5, and she said, it took me once I learned the Enneagram, I found that whenever I was standing in front of somebody, I could type them, and I was aware of what level they were living at. And after a while, I realized that it was really hard to drop into my heart and actually experience the person without
Right.
my Excel spreadsheet going ahead of time, sort of creating safety. But she said it was just so compelling and interesting, of course, and of course she was really good at it. But she said it felt like it was 1,000 miles between her head and her heart that she had to learn to really work to sense her heart and to feel, her heart, both the joy and the suffering. So what's your journey been around opening your heart? Like what's helped it?
Well, I don't know what it is for other types, but vulnerability is um, it may be really difficult for everybody, but it's particularly difficult for fives, or at least for me.
Yeah.
And I have a whole ego narrative built around why that is and why I can't mess with it. It goes back to wanting what I wanted when I was 2 weeks old and not getting it. So just sort
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
deciding that I'll, as as fives do, I will just live without.
Yes. Yeah. I won't need
I'll
it.
stop asking because it's pointless.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So I'm not going to pretend that I've made a whole lot of progress on this, but once again, the pathway that I'm researching now, as it were, is gratitude.
Yeah.
It's looking at what I have, what I am, what I
Mm.
physically am, and
Hmm.
giving thanks for that, and telling myself that is more than enough.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago, I had a heart attack,
Oh.
and that was my body saying, "Hello,
We're down here.
you actually need us."
Yeah.
And so I've had to pay much more attention, literally, to what I eat and what I do, and getting my steps in, and all
Mhm.
that blood pressure and other things.
Yeah. So 5 years. So how is that going? It sounds like it woke up your, self-preservation needs.
Yeah, well, it got my attention. It was I guess as heart attacks go, wasn't that bad. My numbers have been good ever since, so I'm pretty much
Hmm.
fine. But
Okay.
I'm on a whole bunch of medicine forever.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but it kind of forced me to pay closer attention to what was going on with my body than I was before. literally.
Yeah.
And also the other thing it did was there's whole schools of meditation. I mean, at least in the Christian tradition, that focus on the heart.
Hmm.
And I've been reading people like Cynthia Bourgeot, who I know Russ knows,
Hmm.
and it's not figurative. It's literally focusing on your heartbeat,
Mm.
the sensation,
Yes.
and that being in some ways at least as present and visceral as your breath.
Yes. Yes.
That's been really an important um, discipline for me. That's
Mm.
um, and I also use a prayer from the Eastern Christian tradition called the Jesus Prayer, which is also called the prayer of the heart. And it's about the way they talk about it is bringing the mind into the heart.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that is exactly what, in my opinion, a five needs to do.
Yes.
To
Yes.
get that head stuff under control so that it becomes a part of a system and
Hmm.
not the tyrannous, boss of everything.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that I can certainly identify with that. The idea, one of the things that I've been taught is learning to be able to bring my attention into my heart and my body at will. And at least we talk about it as using whatever free attention that my head center isn't eating up to divide attention down into the heart and the quickest contact is what's the sensation of my beating heart, which I think can lead to the emotional resonance too, and also can I feel the energy through my body from my toes up to my head, just by making that shift. And it seems to me over time that with that practice that my heart has gotten more serene but sensitive at the same time. And being a type 4, it can have kind of a turbulent
Oh yeah.
storm in there, but that's has quieted from the sensing practice. And so I know go ahead.
The other thing that helped me uh, is realizing, as the wisdom book and a lot of other books talk about it, it's about the movement from ego to essence.
Yep.
So it's not just um, uh, you know getting the ego under control.
Mm-hmm.
It's allowing something that's already in there to
To wait.
blossom, to
Yes.
emerge.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
and
Mm-hmm.
in the Christian tradition, I talk about the essence as the Christ within us.
Yes.
And that's what that's who you're trying to become, the truly human person, intimately connected in at one with God, really.
Yeah.
So that's the whole spiritual piece of it.
Yeah.
And part of that is um, um, dealing with the ego. Like when I've done some, and this is evolving, but I did a couple of workshops on the passions, and each type obviously has a passion, and learning to, and this comes right out of Evagrius from the third century.
I know. Oh yeah.
The first, as you know, in the tradition, in the lineage, he makes this observation that the monks that he's working with have different. Some have a problem with lust. Some lust is fine, but they have a problem with gluttony. And he
Mm-hmm.
made this. It became the origin of what became the seven deadly sins, which we've kind of expanded to the nine passions.
Yeah. Yeah.
But realizing that you have one area of turbulence that needs to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
If you can address that one, the other ones will begin to fall into place.
Mm-hmm.
What I need to that's part of it. And what I'm now realizing is that there's the holy ideas thing that balances that out, and that gives you something to sort of shoot for while you're,
Mm-hmm.
in my case, trying to manage the hoarding thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, as we talk about in the part one and other trainings, it's this idea, that passions evolved from the shock of losing contact with the divine, and they became, based on our type, the way we shielded our heart from suffering. So if I start to feel into avarice through the three centers and begin to not act it out, then sort of the order of things we spoke about was what will come up next is the fear of being annihilated, right? And then if you bear with that and don't freak out, then underneath it comes the essence quality
Yeah,
of the type.
which there's a dark night of the soul piece that goes along with that. This facing that vulnerability and that fear
Yeah,
of for a five anyway of losing your stuff.
yeah, yeah,
And literally, doing a call of the library is a traumatic thing, as I said before.
yeah.
Because now the internet doesn't help because now we have things like Spotify.
You can go to any library in the world now.
So
Yeah. Well, one of the things that we often say about the fives also is that they are very sensitive to impressions around them, breathing in impressions, and part of that vulnerability is that they can feel like that it's like stuff gets in too easily. So I withdraw
yeah,
into my
yes,
spaceship,
there
and
are there are there are movies, there are media things that I cannot watch because
yeah,
if it's too intense, I won't be able to sleep. I'll just have to process that for days.
yeah,
So so Susan knows there are things that she can watch. I'm not watching.
yeah. Well, I think one of the things that people don't realize is just how truly sensitive fives are, and then part of the protective pattern can be like, do not disturb me. You're not unexpected. I might have to end you. But that sense of guarding my protective atmosphere and that fear of quick invasion or being harmed by
Yeah.
whatever it can be. It's just hardwired into the soul of the five.
And especially as a type five who is a strong introvert, um, not only are we sensitive, but we don't appear to be. We appear to be
Yes. Yeah.
there at all.
Yeah. Well, there's often a
So you
sense
get,
of
uh, yeah, I have had situations of people um, assuming that I didn't care because I wasn't giving much affect about something, but in my interior, I really deeply wanted something, but it was not coming out in my
yeah, yeah,
at all.
yeah. And
I had to
I've noticed.
verbalize. I had to learn to verbalize.
Yeah, say
It may look
something.
like I don't care, but I care, or I may appear to not be here, but I'm here. Hello.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the other thing I think people get mixed up around is because fives tend to have, whether they're feeling confident, there's a kind of confidence around knowing stuff that can intimidate people. It's almost like, the more silent I am as a type five, the more scared people get of me. Like, it's like I know.
Exactly.
So it's an interesting set of dynamics.
Well, in my work, I had a second job for 18 years, and the job was called the stated clerk of a presbytery, which isn't going to make any sense, except uh, it's like being secretary to the bishop, but there's no bishop. But my point was, I was the parliamentarian and the correspondence person, and I managed processes, and I understood church law inside and out, and it was a real expertise centered job.
Mm.
When I was in that job, my fiveness became a plus because I knew everything that there was to know, and
Hmm.
people trusted me so that they asked me a question about process or about church law or about parliamentary procedure, and I just gave them the answer, and that was my job.
Yeah.
And I felt very secure and
Mm.
solid
Mm.
in that role.
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
that's it.
I guess I was good at it because they kept asking me to keep doing it.
Yeah.
Um, but that's exactly the kind of thing that a five would thrive in as a five. And it also
Yeah.
gives you the outlet to express what, to give back data that people need.
Yeah. Well, some of the fives that I've noticed sometimes that when they're in that role where they can express their expertise,
Right.
they're great, great teachers, great, analysts. But then if you like throw them into like ordinary, you know, situations, they can sometimes feel like I don't know how to operate here. I've got all this extraordinary wisdom, and now I'm at the grocery store dealing with, the rest of the asleep people. But just sometimes a discomfort around social engagement.
Yeah.
Not always, but what's been your experience of that? Of course, you have learned how to do that. It sounds like.
Uh, yes, I've developed some listening skills.
Mm-hmm.
But with five, sometimes people feel when a five is paying attention to them, they're not empathizing so much as being examined.
Yeah, right. There's
Evaluated, and it's not what I'm really want to know, but that's the vibe that people get. Is like,
yeah,
well, um, um, yeah. So I've had to, um, if I'm in an unfamiliar, if I'm in an environment that I don't know anything about, or if I'm in like I never like parties or social groups or
yeah.
like that because, as I think my wife said once, she says it's like you're more interested in books than people. I'm going, well, yeah. I'll go to a party and I'll find the library and I'll, you know, um, but
Yeah.
but on the other hand, people can be really fascinating, and if I treat it as if I treat it as a fascinating,
Mm,
object to watch, then that becomes something that
yeah.
and then I start putting it into my own categories and my own mental framework. But
Yeah. Well, I wonder, based on sort of the current world situation that appears to be completely chaotic and weird, what's that like for you? I mean, do you have sort of internal rooms that you've hold court with the information and the weirdness that's occurring?
well, I mean, this is like another couple hours of conversation.
Okay.
But when I was in college, I came across some literature in a philosophy class, basically about we are witnessing the end of the modern age, and that we are in some kind of uh, civilizational transition where the old is breaking down and the new has yet to emerge.
Hmm.
And to me, that explains everything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's what we're seeing. So I'm kind of frustrated with the polarized political situation, because I
Mm.
think one group seems to want to preserve the order and the other one wants to tear it apart, and they're the
Yeah.
ones who want to go back.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and what I'm looking for is I want to see what's emerging. What's the new thing going to be?
Yeah.
And how do we start resonating with that?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
as you know, because I respond to your stuff on Facebook all the time.
Hmm.
Uh, I have always, I may not consider myself a liberal, but I've always voted with them because the alternative is horrible.
It's true.
I mean, even in the church, it was like I always was on the side of the progressives because it seemed to me the conservatives just wanted to burn people at the stake. And one of the things I hate is cruelty, and
Mm,
that's I
mm,
don't see much on the right except various kinds of cruelty.
yeah.
And where I in the meantime, I'm sort of over here with the people on the left until we see what the new thing is going to be. And I see
Mm,
glimmers of it. I mean, the fact that nobody had heard of the Enneagram 40 years ago,
yeah.
and now it's kind of a thing. It's becoming pretty ubiquitous, frankly. I'm seeing it in a lot of places I didn't think I would.
Yeah.
Um, so things are changing. The question is whether we make the turn before we hit the ground.
That's right. Yeah. And it's hard to tell if we're going to make it or not. But yeah.
Exactly. Very scary time. And I don't
Yeah.
think having, what little I know about history, democracies are very delicate. And
Mm,
if you don't hang on to them,
mm.
you can devolve into a very, very nasty place. Think Yugoslavia or
Mm,
Spanish Civil War or something like that. If you have,
yeah.
um, nobody should speak lightly of civil war because it's the worst
Yeah.
thing that can happen.
Yeah. 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 Well, so one thing I think about Eckhart Tolle as being a five, and what I often appreciate about him is he has a quirky sense of humor, along with a great deal of gentleness and skillfulness. And but fives, I notice, tend to have a quirky, offbeat sense of humor,
Oh
uh,
yeah.
and which I find delightful. But what's been your experience of that?
Well, my sense of humor tends to be very dark
Hmm.
and sometimes a little subtle. But yeah,
Hmm.
I have in fact when I'm in an uncomfortable situation, that becomes my default until I um, just basically wisecracking until I'm comfortable with the group I'm with.
Yeah.
Uh, and I've always used it as a tension breaker, even in heavy duty meetings, church meetings and stuff, uh,
Hmm.
to get both sides laughing,
Mm.
breaks some of the tension.
Yeah. Yeah.
It always work, but um,
Well, it seems to me that's the healthy movement of five going to seven, which is
yes.
that sense of humor and lightheartedness and
But yeah, someday I want to talk to you about that because
yeah.
going to seven, I seem to recall it being a disintegration thing, but I have always found going to seven to be kind of liberating. And I actually feel energized when I'm sort of going from project to project. Granted,
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily finishing anything, but I feel like I'm getting a lot of stuff out there.
Yeah.
And I've never had more fun than when I was hanging out with sevens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I
Well,
was, I mean, my seminary roommate was a seven, and I was like straight man for a year, and it was perfect relationship.
that's awesome. Well, I think of it in my experience is that, with the arrows, five goes to eight, five goes
Yeah,
to seven. And the question is, am I inhabiting that line of movement in a healthy way?
right.
If you think of, or am I, there's a movie, you probably heard of it called Shine, which
Oh,
is about David Helfgart, the pianist. And he went to seven under terrible stress and just became maniacal. But
right.
healthy seven is like Eckhart Tolle and his lightness when he jokes about
Exactly.
how one day you'll be lying next to your neighbor at the burial site and you'll be worms will be eating your body and then you'll have humility for the first time, so that's something to look forward to. I mean, who but a five would come up with that? But so yeah, at some point if you want to talk about the lines, that would be great. I'd love to do that with you. So you have anything you'd like to say that you haven't said about, if I mean, there's probably, volumes more, but anything that comes to mind before we close?
Well, I guess what I'm working on right now for this project that I'm doing next month um, is working with the connection between ego and empire,
Okay.
and how empire as the reigning political, economic, social system, whatever it is, just feeds on disordered and broken egos, and tries to
Mm,
keep them as disordered and broken as possible for its own interests.
yeah.
And extending that into a talk with some folks from marginalized communities. I'm hoping I can pull it off.
Hmm.
The title is Decolonizing the Soul Through the Enneagram.
Hmm.
And
Interesting.
the
Yeah.
point being, if we can decolonize our own souls, we can start to see the world around us being decolonized as well,
Yeah.
and to live into the power we have without having to be tools of the empire. So,
Yeah. It sounds awesome.
and there's actually some recent books by African American and other folks on just this related to the Enneagram. One brand new one just came out. I forget the title. I just started it.
Oh,
But another
I think it's
called
no justice.
that's it.
But yeah, by Deborah Egerton, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
She knows Russ. The
Yeah.
other one is by someone from the other school, and it's called
Oh, Palmer Daniels. Yeah.
yeah, it's called the Enneagram and Black Liberation, I think, something like that.
Oh, cool.
It's also
Interesting.
really good. They have a slightly different perspective, but
Yeah.
it's interesting.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for spending time and sharing your story with me and with the virtual world. Just really appreciate it. And uh, yeah. So if
Thanks
you
for
were
the invitation.
say that again,
So thanks for the invitation.
absolutely. I'm going to turn the recording off and then just chat for just a little bit. But
Okay.
yeah.